Hello YouTube, my name is Ryan. This is my first webcam video in a series of webcam videos that I intend to be doing about spiritualism and different health related issues as well. Today I want to talk about something that's brought a lot of fun to me so far in the past few months, actually for the past half a year, and that's the pendulum. Now, what is exactly a pendulum? A pendulum is usually, well, actually I got a couple right here. Here is the main pendulum that I tend to use a lot. This is a quartz pendulum. Quartz is very good for picking up messages from spirit and from the higher self. And my first pendulum that I started pendulum dowsing with is, I'm going to move it out of the light there a minute so you guys can see, is my quartz quartz stone pendulum, crystal, whatever you want to call it. The pendulum works very interestingly. It is basically a crystal or stone that is meant to be used as an antenna, excuse me, I almost couldn't pronounce that, or a receptor for your higher self, which is your spirit. Basically, the way it works is you have two different, forms of consciousness, the consciousness and the subconsciousness. The consciousness is, or also known as the ego, is basically what you're doing right now. It's what I am right now, me talking to you. The subconsciousness is the spirit. It's basically a recorder. It's along for the ride. It knows many of the different things that we're going to have to deal with in life. And it usually, this is where intuition and, different know-how comes into play, because there are certain things that we don't know about that the spirit does know about before we incarnated into this life. So there are different things that we can ask the higher self, very basic questions usually yes or no, and the pendulum will respond to that question by using its own energy to move the pendulum in usually a yes, no, or maybe fashion. Now, how does a pendulum work? Well, the pendulum, I'm going to use my quartz crystal pendulum for this. Usually with the quartz crystal pendulums, or any pendulum for that matter, you usually want to hold it either in your hand at the very top like this, or another great thing to do is loop it around your hand like this, and you can ask it questions. Now, you usually want to have your pendulum, you usually want to have your elbow flat on a table when you ask a question. And you want it that way because you want to keep your arm and your hand perfectly still. So, and usually what you'll do is you ask a question to the pendulum and it will move in a yes or no direction. That yes or no direction can be different depending on how, how the own spirit wants to react with the pendulum. For me, usually my pendulum will move forwards and backwards for yes and side to side for no, and then counterclockwise for maybe. And basically, this is going to be a really rough demo on how it gets done, and I don't have a flat table to position my arm on right now, so I have to kind of use this hand to balance it. So you'll probably see my hand move a little bit, but let's get the pendulum to stop. And usually before I do any sort of pendulum dowsing, I like to ask my guides and loved ones to surround me in the white light of protection and force all negative, evil, and demonic spirits out of my room. And I humbly invite my guides and loved ones to surround me in my room at this time to bring me the appropriate answers to the questions. And I ask this for the greater good of all involved. It's very good when you do these prayers to always surround yourself in the white light of protection, because you don't want evil spirits influencing this little crystal or having anything, manipulative to do with it, because spirits can, from what I hear, they can manipulate these things. And also, you want to also always throw in there that you want these answers for the greater good of all involved, because, that's what we're here for. We're here for knowing the correct answers. We're here for growth. we're here for learning. So for the greater good of all involved enhances those two areas of growth or learning. So that being said, I'm just going to do a small little demo with you guys, and I'm going to ask for the pendulum to stop moving. There it goes. Now I'm going to ask for my guides to please show me the answer for yes on the pendulum. And as you can see, it's moving in the yes direction, forward and backward. Now I'm going to ask, please show me the answer for no on the pendulum. And again, my arm is moving a little bit. I can't help it right now because I'm balancing it on my other arm, but as you can see, it is moving no. Now sometimes the pendulums will move a lot. They'll sway back and forth a lot quicker. Sometimes, you'll get just a little bit of movement out of them. I do believe there's a time in the day in which it's best to ask questions on these things. For example, I'm going to do a question right now. I'm actually going to ask my pendulum a very basic question, and it's good to ask these questions too, because after you ask the pendulum to show you yes or no, you also want to test the validity of the pendulum. So I'm going to ask the pendulum right now, am I a boy? And as you can see, it's swinging in the yes direction. And you can ask it a no question, am I a girl? And it starts swinging in the no direction. So that's a good way to test the pendulum out. And again, I apologize. I know my hand was moving a little bit there. It's kind of hard when I'm going like this the whole time, holding a pendulum. So it's kind of difficult to really get a good example. But that's basically the gist of how pendulum dowsing works. Now, the real question which a lot of people ask me about is, what can you do? Oh, excuse me. What can you do with a pendulum? Like, what kind of questions can you ask? The kind of questions you want to ask is usually current questions. And the way you formulate your questions is you have to keep in mind that the pendulum is not really a fortune-telling device. It is what I like to call a truth detector. It basically looks at your life at the present and gives you the best advice as to where you are. So you could ask, for example, should I take this job position at a certain company? You can also ask like relationship questions. Is this person right for me? Is their energy good for me? Is this a good match? And usually that's kind of a four-part question, because you want to know if you match a person, in terms of mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Those are the four big areas. Usually we're always lacking with somebody in one, but you want to ask those questions because it's very important. And I would always divide a question up like that, because just asking if you have, in terms of relationships, is he the right one for me? There's many factors involved. But it's basically, different questions like that are basically happening in your life. Like, is this purchase good for me? Should I buy this particular house? Things of that nature is really what you use a pendulum for. Now you can, in some cases, use a pendulum for fortune telling, but the problem is that the future is not set in stone. The future is in flux. It's very, at a given time there are 5 different paths that we could go down. Spirit knows the end of all those 5 paths, but we have to pick which path we choose to go down. And then there's also other people that are involved. Other people You know, they have free will too. So, I mean, the pendulum can only tell you for the here and now. Now, you can ask questions which I've gotten accurate answers to, such as, you can ask, for example, all things considered, is, there a 50% chance or more that this, scenario might happen, and you could get a more accurate answer that way. But for the most part, questions, fortune-telling type questions are really difficult to, they're really difficult to go with. They're really difficult to ask because the future is not set in stone. There are some times where you can get a very accurate answer if the future question is karmic related, because karmic questions or karma issues are created before we're incarnated, so they're going to happen no matter what. So karmic related questions, are always, you'll always get the right answer there because they're slated to happen. Now, the do's and don'ts of a pendulum. What should you, what should you do? What should you not do? The one thing I have to say this is one of the big ones for me is, don't ask questions that have a lot of emotion behind them, like emotionally charged questions. If you are asking a question to the pendulum and you really want the pendulum to say yes, and you fear the pendulum saying no, it's a very good chance that you could get a skewed answer, because the consciousness is sending out its own energy, and it can skew or interfere with the pendulum to give you what your desires are. So emotionally charged questions, you don't want to do. You don't want to ask those usually. If you think a question, if you have to have a yes answer or a no answer to a question, you don't want to be dousing it with a pendulum. You want to avoid it. Ask neutral questions. Ask questions that you don't feel very strongly over one way or the other. That's usually the way I like to do it, and it's the way it should be done. You have to also word questions very carefully. I usually tell people try to keep it short and brief when you're asking a question to the pendulum, and try to make it just as simple as possible. Pretend you're asking a question to a first grader. So you want to keep it short and sweet. You want to be in a good frame of mind as well. You don't want to be depressed or have anxiety or anything going on in your life, because that can, decrease the effectiveness of the pendulum. You don't want to be tired when you're doing pendulum dowsing, because tiredness affects the outcome of the pendulum's answers. And then, of course, also there is time of day. I have noticed there are specific times of day in which I tend to get better answers on the pendulum than others, specifically more at night. So that's the biggest thing when it comes to the pendulum. The pendulum, it's a truth detector. It's an antenna for your higher self, for your spirit. Your spirit knows what's good for you and what isn't good for you, and it's going to tell you, for the most part, what is good for you and what isn't good for you. So that is basically what the pendulum is, and I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions regarding the pendulums, feel free to leave a comment. And I'll be doing more of these videos in the future. Probably the next video I'm going to do is on numerology. But that's about it for now. I thank you for watching.